If you're looking to stay informed with the latest analysis on the stories that are shaping our world in the areas of foreign policy, national security, and domestic politics, consider becoming a member of the DSR Network. With the DSR Network podcasts, stay ahead of the curve on global affairs. Each episode across our more than 10 shows features top experts, policymakers, and thought leaders who break down complex issues into digestible, engaging conversations. From breaking news to historical context, we cover the latest topics that matter most. Whether it's the intricacies of international diplomacy, the latest in national security strategies, or the dynamics of U.S. politics, the DSR Network has you covered. Members receive an ad-free listening experience, bonus content for virtually all of our shows, an invitation to join the DSR Slack community, enhanced show notes for select podcasts, and much more. Visit thedsrnetwork.com/buy and enter code JULY2024 to receive 50% off the regular membership price for the first year or first month. That's thedsrnetwork.com/buy and code JULY2024. Thank you very much for your support.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. It seems safe to conclude by now that the rollout of J.D. Vance as Donald Trump's running mate has not gone very well, at all. According to new reporting, a number of Trump allies and Republicans are now sharply second-guessing the decision, and Vance's bizarre public-facing moments are driving all the panic. All of which raises a question. Will Vance's twisted public persona finally enable Democrats to make a successful case against MAGA-style culture warring, one built on demonstrating just how deranged and off-putting to most Americans it is at its very core? Today we're chatting with veteran reporter Jill Lawrence, who has a new piece for The Bulwark arguing that thanks to JD, the sheer weirdness of the Trump-Vance ticket has suddenly become a big and potentially decisive issue in the campaign. Great to have you back on, Jill.
Thanks for having me, Greg. It's great to be here.
So the Washington Post is reporting that in the time leading up to the announcement of Vance, lots of Republicans, big donors, and Trump allies privately argued against the pick. You know they're worried when they're leaking that so much second-guessing took place. Some GOP strategists say they fear Vance could hurt with suburban women, and one advisor tells the Post that Trump allies have constantly been fretting over Vance's, quote, awkward public appearances. Take that all together, and it adds up to a really striking admission. They know this is a disaster, at least for now. Jill, have you ever seen such second-guessing by a party aimed at their own side's choice for Veep, ever?
Well, 2008 comes to mind. That is when John McCain picked Sarah Palin. And in fact, many of the people who are the most critical of the Vance pick, or some of them anyway, were involved in the pick of Sarah Palin in 2008. But it's clear that a lot was not known about her, including that Alaska is just a different kind of place, and it's not as tuned into the issues of the lower 48. And she did have a pregnant teenage daughter that not a lot of people knew about. And she didn't have very much experience. So, it seemed like a very refreshing pick, but it didn't quite turn out that way. And I'm sure that former President Trump had his reasons for picking this guy. I know that his sons recommended him. That's been reported. And, at the time, we have to remember Joe Biden was the presumptive nominee. And so what could be the harm in doubling down on your MAGA turnout intentions and just getting the base all riled up and getting them out to vote? And it just turns out that is not the case. And the other thing that's going on is that there's recordings of J.D. Vance saying all kinds of really off-putting things. And you have to ask yourself, did Trump know about these? Did this guy get any vetting of any serious kind? And if they did know, did they not think maybe this might be alienating to a bunch of people, like possibly most women?
Well, let's just quickly run through the highlights of Vance's introduction to the country. There's the infamous moment where he claimed childless cat ladies, apparently meaning Democratic leaders, can't run the country. Then there's the 2022 audio of him advocating for a quote-unquote federal response to women crossing state lines for abortions, underscoring his zealotry on the issue. And there's Vance criticizing divorce even in abusive situations and declaring that people with kids should have more power than those without kids, and so forth. Am I missing any here?
Well, he was very specific about what kind of kids you should have. You know, they apparently shouldn't be adopted or stepchildren, or, it was very judgmental and very kind of, we're much better than you and we have more thought for the country, more invested in the country, and so you shouldn't count as much as we do. And, combined with the whole tracking women's, menstrual periods and where they might try to go to across state lines to get an abortion, it's just very, very odd and repressive. And odd in this case is the operative word, that Democrats have started to really use: weird, odd, strange, bizarre.
Yeah, they certainly are. And to allude to a point you made earlier, I feel like Trump went into this race fully aware that culture war extremism, particularly on abortion, wasn't solid ground for him to fight on. He tried to argue that returning abortion to the states closes the door on the issue. It doesn't, but he tried to argue that, showing that he understood a vulnerability there. He has even said voters don't care about quote-unquote wokeness, which is kind of heresy in certain quarters of the MAGA right today. You suggest in your piece that Trump might have been overconfident in picking Vance. I'd like to expand on that a bit. I wonder if that dovetails with Trump's extreme megalomania in that he's so sure he was winning by huge margins that he could pick the guy he likes to watch on TV defending him.
I think that's probably the case, and I'm actually not sure of what the timeline was, but certainly after the assassination attempt and his incredible self-possession on stage there, managing to get the perfect shot with the perfect image and the perfect amount of blood, and that was just spectacular. And obviously, he was extremely fortunate. So if he didn't make his final choice, if he didn't settle until after that, I can see where he might have been feeling quite overconfident about having, taken a bullet for the country, or nearly, chosen to survive by God, or whatever they're saying about him these days. But it's, that kind of close call can really, usually it would breed something else in a person, gratefulness, humility, whatever. But with him, it's like, okay, I'm now unbeatable. I can pick whoever I want. My kids like this guy, and he likes me, and he's a rising star. From a political standpoint, those of us who's been following politics for decades, we knew it made no sense because he already had all those people, right? And he already had Ohio. So there was no political sense to it except kind of wanting a mini-me and a reinforcement and some additional turnout in places he was already going to win.
Well, I want to ask you about that. I think that with the Vance pick, Trump was operating out of a 2016 conception of the Rust Belt states and not a post-2020 and certainly not a post-Dobbs one. So the idea is that if they can just park Vance in the 3 blue wall states that Dems need to win, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and they can maximize Trump's support among blue-collar men there. But those are pro-choice states, right? They elected Dems to pretty much every statewide office during the Trump years. And after the Supreme Court struck down Dobbs, those states elected or re-elected Dem governors by comfortable or large margins, in large part to protect abortion rights. And Jill, there are a lot of suburban women around places like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Milwaukee, Detroit. Can you talk about the new geography of the Rust Belt and how the weirdness of Vance that you wrote about will play there?
Yeah, first I'd like to just say, I think with Biden in the race, a Trump campaign and Trump himself might have been seduced into thinking that maybe he was leading by huge margins in these states because of who he was and what he stood for. But the tell was that the Senate candidates were doing much better than Biden. And so, he was operating under the impression, this is my analysis just from watching all this stuff, that he had some margin there and that he was safe and he was going to pick the person he liked and that was going to reinforce his brand. And, even in 2020, you could see the suburbs and suburban women moving in other directions and how someone could look at the post-job landscape and think that this was going to help. I'm just not sure unless you're not looking very carefully. Vance was given a chance to walk back some of the more controversial things he said on Fox News last night. And this was broadcast widely, of course, by the Harris campaign, because he not only did not walk it back, he dug himself under a third time after having done it with Megyn Kelly last week. And then he was doing it with Trey Gowdy, a former Republican congressman on Fox News. And what was so really striking about this is that Gowdy said he had conservative women calling him saying, I really want to vote for this ticket, but how can I if this is what they think? And it was all talking about Vance and his, childless cat ladies and adoption versus stepmothers and trying to carve out an exception for people who really wanted kids but couldn't have them. But, for people who chose not to have them, for whatever reason, they were like off the table, basically selfish and no investment in America, don't care, and anti-family, jumping to a lot of conclusions about a lot of people he'd never met. So Gowdy started talking about these conservative women who are upset about this, and then he started talking about people that he knew and people in his party. For instance, Condi Rice or George Washington, both people who care hugely about the country and had no biological children. The response, from what I could tell, was Vance saying that people were misinterpreting what he said. But then again, parents do have a special stake in America. Well, that's not how you do addition instead of subtraction, which is one of the first rules of politics.
What you're saying there, this admission by Gowdy on the air is really striking. It really shows as clearly as possible a prominent Republican saying very loudly that Vance's sheer weirdness is a serious disaster, or at least potentially one, right?
I think that's right. I mean, weird in this case being really out of the mainstream. Weird like Trump is sometimes. There's all kinds of weirdness that can strike people. And what struck me about the whole trend towards the weird instead of the overblown sort of, my God, we're at an existential crossroads. The American experiment will die. We'll be in an authoritarian dictatorship. American democracy is at stake, and we have to save democracy. And all of that is true. And, it's been terrifying for a long time, but it hasn't worked. Trump he never should have been on the debate stage. He shouldn't be on the ballot. This never should have happened. We never should have gotten this far. So obviously it's not working. But if you want to sort of take these weirdnesses of personality quirks and policies, tie it to policies, I think that that's a winning idea at this point, because it'll get to people, it'll get through to people who don't respond to save democracy. I mean, what does that even mean, right?
No, absolutely. I want to pick up on something you said there about how Vance keeps digging himself in deeper. I think there's an interesting dynamic here where Vance knows that the way to stay in Trump's good graces at a moment when he's under fire is to never back down an inch, never apologize, always be on the attack. But in cases like this, the need to maintain that posture makes it impossible to do the kind of moderation that Vance and Trump need to do with suburban women. And here's another example of it. Jennifer Aniston, she called out Vance's childless cat ladies comment. Vance hit back, calling her response disgusting. That's a terrible way to win over suburban women, but it's what Trump wants to hear, right? I mean, isn't that the dynamic, that staying in Trump's good graces kind of requires that you never back down a centimeter? And isn't that going to work against any efforts to fix the problem here?
You may be right there. You may be right about somebody in J.D. Vance's position. I would point out, and I think you actually pointed out earlier, Trump sometimes moderates and backs down when he feels like something is putting him at a disadvantage, like with abortion. So he gets away with a lot of things that he doesn't let other people get away with. Maybe that's what's going on. But you'd think that political professionals would be sitting down with J.D. Vance and saying, you need to add people to the voters who are going to vote for this ticket. We need to add supporters. We don't need you out there alienating people every day when you're explicitly been given a chance to moderate what you're saying or talk about, I just don't know how he backs away from that, though that's the other problem. I was trying to think of a way that he could do it, and I couldn't.
It's not really in his temperament, but essentially it's not in his worldview either. I mean, it's really funny to me that Fox is always running to the rescue, right? Trying to give these types of people ways out of the problem that they've created for themselves. And they just sort of rebuff it and just like make the Fox host even more appalled. I mean, we've seen numerous examples of Sean Hannity having Trump on and saying things like, well, you didn't really mean that you're going to be dictator for a day, did you? And Trump's kind of like, well, yeah, I kind of did mean that. I'm actually, just kind of paraphrasing. That's not an exact, replica of what was said, but that happens all the time.
Right. Almost like it's a feature, not a bug. It's very easy to tie the weirdness to policy positions, but it's also very easy to tie it to personality type things like you see at Trump rallies all the time, the electrocution and the sharks. This ticket was already weird enough with Trump alone, and now they have J.D. Vance, and it was already, women were already turning out in droves on these abortion referendums, and there are going to be more of them this fall. So is this what they really needed? No, this was exactly what they didn't need, and it's just mysterious to me. But of course, everything Trump does is a mystery to me, including how he gets people to vote for him.
Well, Vance also really is very deeply red-pilled in a way that I think makes it impossible to repair the problem here. Note the fact that the people who advocated for him are the tech bros, Trump's sons, people like that. These are people who are very deeply red-pilled and in sway to MAGA and just believe the whole kind of red-pilled worldview that is kind of evolved here around wokeness, around fertility, around the need to sort of sustain the nation by keeping the birth rate up. And these are, I think, ideas that turn off a lot of mainstream Americans, right? Mainstream Americans do not react well to religious right ideas. And this is kind of a new species of them in a way. I don't know how new, but it's a bit of a different species from the, Christian right of the 80s or whatever. And it's a new manifestation of it. It seems to me that what people will react to is kind of that weirdly shocking glimpse of this new set of ideas. And well, I wonder what you think of that. Is that a good way to think about this?
Well, I think it is. And I think that the Harris campaign and also Tim Walz, the Minnesota governor who's been talking about weirdness, they connect it to loss of freedom and depict the Democrats as the Freedom Party. And that's really easy to do when you've got these very repressive religious views coming out about the role of women and, the whole emphasis on childbearing and just all, the other thing is, they want to monitor your body. As Tim Walz put it, they want to be in your exam room. They want to take away books from you. So there's a whole infrastructure there, a whole foundation of freedom versus repression and freedom versus government controlling your life. So the parties have pretty much completely switched places on those issues. And I think Democrats have a very strong case. And you can make it either as freedom, you can make it as these are very weird ideas. You can say these people want to, dictate your lives. They want the government to dictate your lives. So there's a lot of ways to put it, but I think there's a lot of strong arguments to make, and they all lead to the same place that it's not a winning ticket.
Well, I guess we'll see. I want to just close out by dwelling on how Democrats can exploit this. It seems like Vance is betraying a genuine hierarchical view of gender and social relations in which the family really needs to be a certain way or it's not doing its part to contribute to the vitality of the nation. And he's showing a real contempt for real live human beings who don't hew to that vision. I mean, we talked about Democrats like Tim Walz. Harris is very well suited to make the case against that set of ideas, isn't she?
She's incredibly well suited. It was very impressive how her stepdaughter and her husband's ex both came to her defense as a co-parent, a very involved step-parent. The family is so functional that the ex-wife comes over for holidays, that sort of thing. It's a real example of a blended family that works. And there are so many families like that and so many different kinds of families. It's, when I see a politician or a would-be politician going after someone who's 32 years old because she doesn't have kids, and that would have been Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that Vance was going after. She was 32 or something at the time he was doing this, and she had not started a family. Well, that's up to her, right? It's not his decision when or if she starts a family. It's just so intrusive and offensive that I just don't see, and it so builds on the whole abortion ban thing where you can't even get life or death health care if you need it. So I just don't see this as a winning hand. And I saw Trump is not a winning hand to begin with. And now he's added, more and more and more weirdness to the ticket. Harris is well suited to make these arguments, and anyone she picks as her vice president is going to have a very strong case to make, whether it's Josh Shapiro or Mark Kelly or Tim Walz, the late blooming newcomer in this situation. It's going to be a strong ticket no matter what.
Sure looks that way. There's a long way to go, and it's going to be very, very hard fought, but it looks a lot better now than it did 2 or 3 weeks ago, that's for sure. Well, listen, Jill Lawrence, thanks so much. This is fascinating stuff. We really appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Folks, make sure to check out some great new content we have up at TNR.com. Economist Dean Baker laying out all the good news that Democrats can actually run on, and Ben Metzner's interview with political scientist Sam Rosenfeld about how the two parties have both been hollowed out from the inside. We'll see you all tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler on the DSR Network.